on this computer. So, hello everybody. I'm really glad to see you all again here. And today is the last lesson of this webinar of four meetings about the map of De-Colonizer. After I will send again the link for those of you who want to order it, for others, for groups, for whoever wants. I will share with you the link how to do it. And today, as you know, I will focus mainly on the issue of destroyed localities, Jewish localities destroyed by Israel. And I will focus mainly on Mizrahi localities. I hope everyone knows what means Mizrahi. In some places, I know in France, usually it's called Sephardi Jews. I like to say more Arab Jews. I think it's more accurate and right way to say, but we can, of course, discuss it. It means localities that most of the people living there are from Arab or North African origin. Now, I want to start this talk today with a kind of introductory personal note, if I may, to this work. Like to introduce a little bit from my personal perspective as someone that researched and edited this map with the help, of course, of many others, but I want to tell you something a little bit personal of how I see this specific theme of today. So what we see here on this first screen is the legend of the map that I'm sure you already know it. I will not read it, of course, but I want to refer to some main or resources that I refer to them in several lessons, and main resources or maybe sometimes some of the resources, important resources for the work I did. So for Palestinian localities destroyed before the Nakba, I used and I showed you the book of Avneri, and also the Jewish localities before I used this book and other resources. On the non-aggression initiatives, I use Ariel Azulai's work. On the Nakba destruction, there are of course, many resources. I just mentioned a few of them, Khalidi, Abu Sita, Abu Aya, and of course, there are many others and important ones. On the Israeli destroyed localities, I mentioned here one rather known Zionist historian, Netanel Lor. On destroyed Golan localities, El Marsad organization, and Yigal Kipnis book. If you're interested, I can send you the reference later. On Palestinian localities, 67 destroyed. It's more eclectic. As I told you, I collected it from several resources. The 70 localities under threat of destruction, I took it mainly from B'Tselem work. The Bedouin unrecognized villages from Bedu map, but also other projects. And then for the issue of today, there are two subcategories. First one is the Jewish localities destroyed mainly in the disengagement project of Ariel Sharon, planned in 2005. I will talk about it. You can find a lot of information in Wikipedia and other places. And then the last one, and that's why it's personal, because the Mizrahi localities destroyed by Israel is in fact a project of De-Colonizer, in the sense that when I started to work on this issue, I didn't find, until today, I don't know of any other collection or someone that tried to collect those places destroyed by Israel, the Mizrahi ones. And I must say that I was quite surprised when I started to work on this project. I have to tell you also that I didn't even think it's Mizrahi localities. I knew of some of the cases, of course. I knew one very famous case. I will talk about it today, of course, the Yemenites in Kinneret, in the Sea of Galilee. But, and I knew, of course, of those localities in destroyed Palestinian localities that Mizrahi Jews inhabited those places in Jerusalem and in Tel Aviv areas, and been destroyed. And these are the main, maybe, stories of today also. So I knew about some of them, but I didn't label them as Mizrahi localities. But then when I started to check this issue of destruction or destroyed localities by Israel in the context of colonization, I found out that very big majority, not to say, of course, 100%, it's never 100%, are Mizrahi people in those places. And then it's, of course, strengthened the ethnic, I would say openly, racist component of the, or motive maybe in this destruction. But again, nobody collected this before. I didn't see any collection for that. I would be very glad if someone can find for me a collection like this. And I talked to many researchers, especially, of course, those researchers and activists on the Mizrahi issue in Israel. There are many and very vocal and very, very interesting people. Nobody of them knew a collection like this. So in that sense, the story I bring today, my argument today, it's our own innovation. And I hope it will be convincing and telling for you, but I'm really glad that we can share this new information. So just to repeat quickly, the two subcategories in the Jewish destroyed localities by Israel and before Israel are two subcategories. One is first is the disengagement plan by Ariel Sharon, and I will explain why I see this as belong here. And the second is a Mizrahi localities that I will talk mostly today. Before entering in the issue of the destroyed localities, I want to give maybe what is not destroyed localities by Israel that are not part of the colonization process. Because there is mainly this big example in Sinai, Israeli colonies or settlements that were established after the occupation of 1967. In the 70s, Israel settled several places in Sinai, in occupied Sinai from Egypt. And maybe I just named here the most known of them. Yamit was a city, a kind of city, you know. This photo is of Yamit in the North Sinai, not far from the beach and south to Gaza Strip. Some 2,500 people live there. Ophira, where is Sharm el-Sheikh, was Ophira. And then Neviot, where is Nueba. Keep the name a little bit phonetically, the names. Dizahav, where is Dahab in Sinai, and other places in Sinai. And all of them were destroyed by Israel after the agreement, or as part of the agreement, materialization of the agreement with Egypt, the peace agreement in the 80s, early 80s, destruction of those localities. So one can argue if there is a real peace between Israel and Egypt, but for me it's clear, evident to say that the withdrawal and the destruction of those places, it's a withdrawal from the expansion of the Israeli occupation, much beyond the borders of 48, as I talked about it last time. So those places are destroyed, but not in the process of colonization, but to some extent, at least we can see it as kind of decolonization or withdrawal of the colonial ruling, Israeli colonial ruling over Sinai. So this is what is not and what it is, yes, in this map. And I have here first a subcategory, as I said, and not the main one I'm going to talk today, but it's important one. It's those 28 Jewish localities that I defined them in the map, that they were built and destroyed by Israel to facilitate better control over Palestinians. There are 23 of them in Gaza Strip, what's called in Hebrew Gush Katif, and 5 of them in the West Bank. Now, what I mean by destroyed, built and destroyed to facilitate better, it means that those localities were built in the first place in Gaza Strip and also, of course, in West Bank to control the area. Of course, people also settled there and lived there, of course, but I see them as a mean of colonization, of controlling the place. And when they were destroyed by Israel, they were destroyed also in order to control better the places or the areas from where they were removed. So again, here the first point is that they were built, but then built with the objective to control the Palestinian land. At one point, those colonies became too pricey for Israel, and Israel decided to remove them. Ariel Sharon decided for this unilateral redeployment and decided to destroy those colonies. And then Israel, I think the most important point here, as I mentioned, is that after Israel removed those settlements, Israel continued controlling over those areas in other ways. Gaza, we know it clearly. No one can say that Gaza is not under Israeli control. We know it very well. Israel controlled Gaza from all over, around on the surface, on the land, under the land, on the air, the sea, everywhere. Israel controlled every inch in Gaza. So many devices, and of course the West Bank, Israel continued controlling the places, but not by settlers living in those specific spots. In a way, I can say that Israel used and dumped those settlers. Like when it was a good idea to have their settlers, Israel did it, but then, as I explained, it was too pricey. Israel removed them. Now, I don't, of course, deny that there was, these people had, pain and suffer of their removal from there. Many of these settlers, even if Israel used them, but of course, they did it with a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of Zionist enthusiasm also to occupy the land of Israel, but also to take control of Palestinians and to participate in this way of control. But they had, of course, their pain when they were removed from those places. But their pain, of course, got a very high visibility in the media, both Israeli, of course, media, and also international media. It was very massively covered. And also in the collective memory in Israel, there are museums for those destructions, and they are very much visible in the Israeli discourse since then. And of course, Israel allocated a lot of resources to ease their displacement. So of course, when we talk about destroyed localities, we can not compare at all the situation of the Palestinians to those of the Jews, of course, and we can discuss it later. But I just say it from the beginning. Of course, it's completely different. They are not refugees, and in many levels they are very different, but still they were also removed. And for me, I see it as part of the Israeli colonization. Now I move on to the main issue that I want to discuss today. It's the issue of the Mizrahi localities. And here at the top, you can see the list that I listed for those localities. The 15 Mizrahi localities. I'm not going to name them. I'm going to mainly talk about three examples that I chose that I think are important ones. In general, I can tell you that in all of those places, all of them, there were violence. In fact, one of my considerations, how to decide if I present one of those places in the map or not, is the question of violence and resistance to the removal of these people. and I will talk about it toward the end, about examples that were not in the map, even though they are quite similar situation. So in all of them, there were different levels of violence, and the most, of course, violent incident took place in Kfar Shalem, southeast Tel Aviv, in the lands of Salameh, the big town of Salameh, that was destroyed, expelled and destroyed in 1948. And Kfar Shalem was Salameh was inhabited and renamed as Kfar Shalem. And then there was, like in all those places, plans to evict the people. And in 1982, it culminated to a real violent incident when the police killed Shimon Yoshua, shooting him. The police explained that they thought that he has a weapon, he was going to shoot them. Anyway, they always have explanations, and they killed this guy that you see in the photo, this very dramatic photo. Down here you see, and you will get it later, an article I published about this in English, about this issue. So you can see there a little bit more information that you will hear today. Now, before entering the specific stories or examples, I want to give a little bit of background in order to understand the ideology, or where this possibility, I would say, or practice of destroying those localities came from. For me, this is the deep motives, I would say, or the deep ideology for this. So I just mentioned, it's very quick, I just mentioned a few things here. If I go back to the second Aliyah, which is second immigration of Jews, which is very important one, some 35,000 Jews, mostly from East Europe, immigrate to Palestine from 1904 to 1914. Many of the important leaders, Zionist leaders, and Israeli leaders later came in this Aliyah. One of them, of course, most known is David Ben-Gurion. Interestingly, some in this time came also from Yemen. And this I will talk a little bit about it just now, because in fact, there was, in this time of the second Aliyah, they had a very strong idea of the kibush avoda, what we call, and this is, from my understanding, there is not exactly a translation for this term, as you see here, kibush avoda. It means that the work should be done only by Jews. So one of the main concepts of the people, the pioneers, the chalutzim, the Jewish Zionist pioneers, was that the work in the Jewish colonies in New Eretz Israel, has to be done by Jews, only by Jews. Now, the problem is that was the gap between the idea and the fulfillment of this idea, because these people came from, a lot of them from Russia. They were not used to the weather and the possibility of, like, the conditions of work in the Middle East, in Palestine. And it was very, very hard for them, too hard to work the land in these conditions, very hot places and so on. And one of the solutions they found was to look for Jews that are used to these conditions, and they labeled them as natural workers. And they thought about the Yemenites, the Yemenite Jews, and they in 1911, there was a very interesting project of that this guy that you see in the photo here, his name is Shmuel Yavnieli, and he was sent in 1911, to convince Jews from Yemen to come to Palestine, to Eretz Israel, of course, and to come to work there, to live there. Now, it's a very interesting story. I will not talk too much about the details, but it's really fascinating. Those of you who didn't read about it, I really recommend you to find the references, and it's a very interesting story. This person, Yavneeli, is originally from Russia. And you see, as you see here in the photo, he is disguised as Yemenite. So he went to Yemen to bring those Yemenite Jews. Before he left, they nominated another guy that will go there, and he was originally Yemenite. You know, I'm talking about in Palestine. The Zionists nominate another person to go, but then they didn't want him to go. But this Yavneeli, that was Russian, but he had to take like a seminar, quick seminar in learning about the habits of the Yemenites and their clothes and many things. And then he became kind of appropriating the Yemenite habits and appearance. And he traveled to Yemen to bring Jews. And he brought some of those Jews from Yemen to work in Israel or in Palestine, and it was very, all the attitude to them was, of course, as that they come, they are cheap workers, and they can work the land because they are natural workers, as I showed here. Now, maybe the first case that I'm going to talk about, I still remember the shock that I had when I heard about it the first time. It was really, I don't remember when it was, some 10 years back, but it's really very, very interesting and dramatic story, I think. And I'm not sure everyone here heard about it, but it's very known. Story of started in 1912, when 14 families, Yemenite families, settled in Kinneret, the Sea of Galilee, so just on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. Some of those families were from those Yemenite who came, that Yavneeli convinced them to come, that I mentioned just now, and they settled there in this house that you see in the photo here. It's called the motor house, which was a motor of pumping the water. And it was very small, but they settled there in very hard conditions. And they were, in fact, convinced to come there by some Zionist people from the Zionist organization to come to settle this area. A year later, settled in this same, just few hundreds meters of them, but in the same place. It's called Kinneret, Kvutzat Kinneret. It's a kibbutz, one of the most known and even I would say mythological kibbutzim in Israel is this group in Kinneret, group of Ashkenazi people from the second Aliyah. Some of them are really top Zionist leaders like Ade Gordon, Yitzhak Tabenkin, and others. I didn't want to bring too many names, but it's very, very important place, and it really has a mythological central place in the Zionist story of colonization in Palestine. There are songs about this place, and a lot. It's very, very known. And they came a year after the Yemenites. Now, they lived in the same place, in fact, and but the Ashkenazi group didn't like to live near those Yemenites and didn't accept to live near them. And there started tensions between the groups. For example, there were issues of praying. The prayers, the Ashkenazi group didn't want the Yemenites to pray with them or in the place of the kibbutz. There were issues of work between them, and the conditions that those Yemenites lived were really terrible. Some of them died in the malaria illness, and with this tension between the two groups, the Zionist authorities thought, okay, what to do. And at the end, they forced the Yemenites in 1929 to leave the place. They forced them to leave, and they lived to a place where is Rehovot today. Now, they of course, those Yemenites from the Kinneret are, of course, almost not known, and their story is not really commemorated, their loss and their suffer. They themselves, they keep the memory, but it's nothing to compare to the memory of the place in the collective memory of the people from Kinneret, of course, the real Kinneret, if I can say. And then if I go forward to the beginning of the Israel, at the time of Israel, I want to refer first to the one here on the left side. It's some words from a speech by Yosef Tal, that he was one important leader he served in the Jewish agency, and he worked a lot on the issue of immigration, what we call Olim Hadashim, the new immigrants to come to Israel. And here there is one quotation from him talking in the Jewish Congress in Jerusalem in 1951. It's very racist text, very racist. I just translated very short part of it. I mean, it's not exactly quotation, but the sense of just to you to get the idea. He said there is nothing in common between parents who give everything to their kids. It means us, European, Ashkenazi, enlightened people, to their kids, and those who don't understand the duty of education. So the Mizrahi people, they don't understand what is education. Of course, he say many more things here. For example, he says something like it starts with the basic condition for the idea of becoming one society, what we call in Hebrew this concept of melting pot, like to become one society, let's say. So the basic condition of this is to change the transformation of the ways of life of the people that came from the retarded countries. The retarded countries. It's really unbelievable for me today, racist text. So there are other, I bring this because I think it's really important as a background of the understanding how the concept or the ideas how to Israel and the Zionist, many leaders in the Zionist movement refer to those Mizrahi Jews. The other letter here that is much more important for our issue of today, it's a letter from the same Yosef Tal, from the Jewish Agency. He writes in 1949, in April 1949, so right after the Nakba, he writes a letter to the Olim department, so it means again the new immigrants department in Jerusalem, and here they discuss the issue of distributing, how to distribute the houses of the Palestinians that, the Palestinian refugees that were expelled, and now we are distributing or sharing the looted property, and so this is what he writes. So he says to the other person, he writes, we need 400 apartments in Bakaa, in Jerusalem, and German colony for government officers. What it means that Bakaa and German colony, and of course also Old Katamon and Talbieh, is the most rich neighborhoods. The houses there, I'm sure many of you know, very beautiful big houses. They are for us, for our people. It means the government officers. Of course, most of them, if not all, originally are officers or members of Mapai party that is leading the new country, Israel, the new state. And these places are given to us. And then he continues, say, for the new immigrants, for the Olim, new immigrants that are coming these days. In those days, there was a big immigrant waves from North Africa, from Arab countries, will be given Musrara and Lifta, which these are the places that are, of course, the conditions are much worse. And in those places, later on, as we will see also now soon, these places were never given with title to those people living there, like to those Mizrahi. So since the very beginning, we see the differentiation between the distribution of the flats or the apartment stolen from the Palestinians to ones that the good ones go to the Ashkenazi Mapai people, and the poor one go to the Mizrahim, and also later how what happened with them. It's of course very important that this is what we see here, what I write here. So some Jewish kibbutzim that I mentioned here built on destroyed or habited in houses of these Palestinian villages. I just mentioned few here, Megiddo, Bet Ha'emek, Nirim, but there are of course many others. I'm talking about places that really inhabited within houses of Palestinians, okay? Not only the land. The land, of course, it's almost all of them, but I'm talking about kibbutzim who really use houses of Palestinians. In some cases, at the beginning of the kibbutz, this is where they lived, in houses of Palestinians. On the other hand, as we mentioned now, Lifta and all the other places, Sumail, Jamasin el-Gharbi, Salam, Sheikh Muanes, and other places that are all Palestinian localities, destroyed places from the Nakba, they were inhabited by Mizrahi Jews, and that they never got the title on the land. Contrary to the kibbutzim that went through very deep process of privatization and got full ownership on their land and on the houses, and they can even today rent the houses or sell the houses in their own places. This photo is from a project that I started last year. It's a very unique moment, maybe the only moment something like this happened, that I had the chance to document it here. What we see here, this woman here, her name is Majdulin Beidas. She is from Sheikh Muanes village in North Tel Aviv today, and she's also a good friend. Since I started Zachot, I was in touch with her. We visited with her several times, Sheikh Muanes. And this guy here, his name is Shmulik Sheleg, and he was the last Jewish resident in a house, in an originally Palestinian house in Sheikh Muanes in North Tel Aviv. And last year, 2019, his house was destroyed, and I by chance, I knew that it's happening, so I ran there with a camera. I documented this in the last 2 days there, and in the day of the destruction itself, I told Majdulin, and she joined me, and she joined to see the destruction of the house there, the last house of Sheikh Muanes, her village, the village of her parents, and there was a very moving and interesting encounter between Shmulik and Majdulin. He was very open to her pain as well, and it was really moving, and I still have to do something about it. But I think it's, for me, this moment of showing the destruction, the double destruction, two-layer destruction of Israel by Israel, first, of course, of the Palestinians, and then years later of the Israelis who are living in those places, was a very important moment. Now I want to delve really much deeper into one specific case that I think can teach us a lot about this discrimination that I'm talking about. I mentioned it already. And to talk about this case of Givat Amal Bet, it's called, and and Shikun Tzameret. Those two neighborhoods that you see them here, Givat Amal Bet in red and Shikun Tzameret in blue, are two neighborhoods in the north of Tel Aviv today that were settled in the lands of the Palestinian village of Jamasin El Gharbi, that was evacuated in January, sometime in January 1948, so early, rather early at the Nakba. So from what I do here, I took it from an article that I just read, and again, I can send it to you if you are interested later, with a lot of information. I took the main important details here to show the story, the different story of the lands right for these two neighborhoods that settled more or less in the same time on almost the same land. Like they are really few hundreds meters from each other. It's very close, just across the street, the main street in North Tel Aviv. So Givat Amal's story, as you see, is very long one and complicated comparing to Shikun Tzameret, that is very easy, I would say, and smooth process. So let's go first to Givat Amal Bet. The people there were, in February 1948, they settled there to prevent the return of Palestinian refugees, and this happened in so many other places, of course. It's not unique to these places, and not to Mizrahim only, also the kibbutzim I mentioned and others, but here it was explicitly told to those people, and they came from Iraq, from Yemen, from Syria, Morocco, and they settled this place in February 48. In 1949, Tel Aviv municipality turns to those people and asked them to move out from there and define them as unlawful possessors. So they say, okay, you did your job, now you move out because we want to develop this place. But of course, the residents there didn't agree. They say, okay, you want to remove us out, we want compensation, I don't know, you needed us, so you ask us in, where we go from here, and they protest. In November 49, the government decided that they will remain until accommodated in their permanent place. So they say, okay, the government decided at the beginning that they will try to see how to settle this issue and how to accommodate them in another place. In the 50s, the government, I say the government, but it's different, organs of the government. I'm not going to go into too many names. I don't want to make it too heavy. In the 50s, the government published a notice in newspapers that is calling to regulate the legal possession of the residents of those, notice calling, regulate the legal possession of these people that don't have contract, in fact. The problem is that two things. Mainly, it was published in Davar newspaper. Davar is the newspaper that mainly people from Mapai or kibbutzim, they were reading it. And the second problem is that many of the residents in those places were illiterate in Hebrew, and they couldn't read, and they didn't even know about this ad or this notice in the daily newspapers. In 1961, the government sold this land to a private company with the explicit condition that this company should provide an equivalent housing to the people from Givat Amal Bet. The company didn't comply, and the ILA, the Israeli Land Authority, didn't impose sanctions. The Israeli, it's the fact, it's like the state or the government should have kept this contract or make sure that this contract is complied, and they didn't do it, and they just didn't fulfill this condition, this company. And then in the court in 1960s, in the 60s, the court decided, there was one court ruling on this issue that decided that the residents there are licensees. So they are sitting in this place with some kind of permission and with some rights. They have some rights. They don't have, of course, ownership of the place or rights of the land, but they have some rights to be there. They are not transpassers. But then in 1987, this company sold the land to two other companies without even informing the residents, and without, as I said, fulfilling the condition to give them some housing, other housing. And in 1988, immediately those companies start with lawsuits to evict the people from Givat Amal Bet. The court then decided against the residents and decided that there is no equivalent housing. They don't need to provide it, but only compensations. And then in 2012, the owner, Yitzhak Tshuva, very important tycoon in Israel, very rich person, gets a court ruling that says that the people from there are trespassers and they should be immediately removed from the place. But then in 2019, they had a very important court ruling and very revolutionary in this story, that when the court decided that these people again are licensees and they are sitting there with some rights and they are not trespassers, and he also determined some compensation, but very, very low for them. And now they appeal again to courts to try to have a good compensation and not compensation that are so poor that cannot let them buy another flat, another place. So as you can see, the situation, of course, I didn't mention the terrible conditions that these people lived all the year in these lousy houses and neighborhood of Givat Amal. On the other hand, we see the short story of Shikun Tzameret. Shikun Tzameret was more or less in the same time, 1949, settled by Ashkenazi Jews, all of them city and state officers, and all of them belong to Mapai in some way or another. So they are close, you know, to the government and the municipality, and they immediately get, of course, authorization to settle in the place. And in 1953, they get leasing contracts. And in the 90s, when Israel goes through a very important privatization process, they have a level of kind of what's called in that article concealed privatization. So it's almost full private rights over the land. And in 2009, this is completed and they have full ownership on the place, and they can, of course, sell the flats or whatever. And it was very smooth move to private, to full rights over the land. So you see, again, the very big difference between in the attitude of the Israeli government or authorities to people in the same land, but those who are Mizrahi and those who are Ashkenazi. This is the note. In fact, it's not the note, but up here it's written the note that was published in the Davar newspaper. And it's a little bit, it's what I told you before, more or less, that it's calling the people that are sitting on those flats without contract, so they can regulate their title or their lease contract to make this contract. They have only 15 days to do it. Here is the kind of the regulations that they published. And now, to finish the story of Givat Amal, I bring you some photos. Always in photos seems very powerful, because in fact, it's not only that these places, the story in Givat Amal is not that they are in threat of being destroyed, but they were already evicted. There were several, say, layers or times of evictions, because they are in several situations of land ownership, and there were already some 14 families that were evicted a few years ago. I think it was 2018. We visited there the place, and this photo up here on the right is a man named Menashe Khalifi. He was born in Jamasin El Gharbi, or Givat Amal Bet, and he told us, for example, that his parents were told that you should never move out from this place, these houses, because if you move out, the Arabs will come back and take the place. So they were sent into this place in order to prevent the return of the Palestinians. On the left side, you see up there the photo of the destruction of some houses in Jamasin or in Givat Amal, and down you see the police that was sent for the destruction operation, and many signs that are calling for inquiring committee, for the struggle for Givat Amal, and the protest of the residents there. So the second story the third story that I want to mention here is a much less known story. I would not be surprised if no one of you heard about it. I'm saying this because when I started to research, I never heard of this story, even though it's really very much telling this situation. We're talking about a place named Tochelet, and if you look at the map down here, the piece of the map that I put here, we're talking about a place that is in fact this 3 dots that you see here in red, gray, and this star are the same place. So historically or chronologically, it's a Safaria. It was the beginning a Safaria village, a Palestinian village, a Safaria, and after they were expelled in the Nakba, they were in the 50s, two different parts of Safaria were inhabited. One of them by 50 Yemenite families in place that they called Tochelet, Moshav Tochelet, and the other one is Kfar Chabad, which is very known because it's there until today, of course. Kfar Chabad is those Hasidis that they are waiting for the Messiah to come, and they built already the house for the Messiah. Is there the same shape of their rabbi in Brooklyn? You have the same house there like in Brooklyn. Now, these people, the both groups settled the place. And in the beginning, it was okay between the two groups, but in 1958, the people from Chabad, the Hasidi, those ultra-Orthodox, they addressed the authorities with a request to evacuate those Yemenites from Tochelet. They had some reasons why, something with the use of the land, they didn't use the land, whatever, never mind, but they wanted the whole place for themselves, and without those Yemenites there. Now they were backed, supported by important parties in the government, and they had close ties with the government, and they started tensions between the two communities. The Yemenites families that were not organized at the end in the 70s were evicted from there, and this house that you see here down is one family that remained there, Kellner family, remained in Tochelet until today. And as you can see, this very modest house is originally from Safaria, the Palestinian village. So this is, again, a story of clear discrimination or a different attitude to communities that sitting in the same, very much the same place. Now, here I refer to the issue of why some of those places are not in this map. What I'm talking here, I mentioned Lifta and Sheikh Buanes and probably other places. In fact, what happened in all of these places, that since the very beginning, the Jews that lived in those places didn't resist or object their eviction with the ideological, I would say, ideological terms, okay? They never said, okay, it's important for us here, it's our homes. No, they said, okay, you want to evict us? Okay, because they lived in very bad conditions in all those places. So you say, okay, we just want good compensation for this, like that we can buy some other place. And In fact, in Lifta, in the outskirts of Jerusalem, happened more or less the same story. And in fact, it was almost in the map, but very much recently and very short time before I published the map, there was a big story about Lifta, about this guy here on the left side. His name is Yoni Yochanan. He is one of the 13 Jewish families in Lifta that remained there until very recently. And they had an eviction order, okay, by the government. They were called trespassers, and they were very much insulted by that, of course, because they were born there. And so they struggled for years not to be evicted and not to be called trespassers. And in the I don't remember the date, but maybe 2 years back from now, they succeed to make a deal that was satisfied for them with Moshe Kahlon, the economy minister of Israel, that made a deal with them. And he said, he gave a good speech in the day of the agreement. He said, it's unbelievable that we call these people trespassers. They are in fact pioneers who settled in Lifta. And okay, it's a bit ironic language, I have to say, but still, they got in fact what they wanted. So they were evicted, but with their own, let's say, agreement. They consent for this. So in that sense, for me, I didn't define them as destroyed localities because they agreed to be removed from this place. So in most of these places, and also the photo I showed you before of Shmulik Sheleg, it was more or less the same case. Also Shmulik, until the last moment, and it was on video, I filmed there many hours. The negotiation went until the last moment, how much money he will get and everything. And at the end, he agreed, he moved out, and they gave him the check. So he moved out with consent. So this is the reason why I didn't include these places in the map. Now for the last slide of this presentation, I want to say something a little bit more general. For me, this story of the destruction of the Mizrahi localities by Israel shows very much the core of the Zionist movement, which is white European, and it's anti-Arab, in fact, very much anti-Arabs. Of course, Palestinians are the main victims of Zionism, but in a way, the Palestinians were not a target of Zionism, like to destroy them, their life. My argument is that, in fact, Palestinians were, in a way, not there. As I mentioned here, it was an empty land. You remember the Israelis, the Zionists talk about an empty land for a land without people and so on. So the Palestinians is kind of like, okay, they are there and we have to remove them because it's our place. But it's not, they were not the target of the project. They paid the price. They paid, of course, they are the victims of Zionism because they lived there. There are Arabs who lived in Palestine. And in fact, if I want to go even beyond this argument and to share with you and to recommend very much this book that was published not long ago, I think a year ago, by Marcelo Swirsky and Ronen Ben Aryeh. It's called From Shared Life to Co-Resistance in Historic Palestine. Their main argument, which I think it's really groundbreaking for me, for the understanding when I read it, and their main argument is that this destruction of the shared life of Jews, mostly Mizrahi, and Muslims and Christians in Palestine was at the core of the Zionist enterprise from its beginning. So their argument is that, in fact, this was the main project of Zionism, was to destroy this shared life, Arab life, in fact, in the Middle East, in historic Palestine, and to destroy this shared life. Now, in order to wrap all into a little bit, go back into connect also to the other categories of destruction in the map, I would say that in contrary to the Palestinian and the Syrian localities, that, okay, we can talk about many differences between the destruction of Palestinians and Syrians, of course, and those of the Mizrahi, and I mentioned some of them. But one maybe most important to our issue here today is that there was no really project of destroying the Mizrahi localities. I don't argue anywhere that, I don't think that Israel or the Zionists had the idea, okay, we want to destroy the Mizrahi localities in principle. Because if this would be the case, they would destroy more places just out of pure racism. It's not the case. They destroyed them out of both racism, as I see it, and also because they needed, it's a connection, it's a combination between racism and neoliberal economy that of development and building new places and open market and so on. And these Mizrahi localities were simply there and they had to remove them, and they were not, as I mentioned, they were not strong enough to object this destruction. And here I will stop and I will open it to your comment. And yes, so I will stop the share and I will see you again. Yes. So thank you very much for listening. And thank you. Hi, Naji, thank you. And now if you want to ask questions, I saw that there are comments. I did not open it yet, but I prefer first if some of you have any comments, and we can discuss some issues here. So please go ahead.
Eitan, is this whole section also in your book?
Which quotation?
The Jewish expulsions and
the Mizrahi,
yeah,
expulsion.
The Mizrahi issue, yeah.
We mentioned it. Leonor is here. I can ask. We mentioned Mizrahi evictions in the book. I don't remember. Maybe some.
I think so.
Not very much. We talk about the map, but not very much.
But have you published it? This is an article. I missed the first 5 minutes. So you
Yes.
do have this published. Okay.
Yes, and you will get in the presentation in the article that I published is there. It's not very long, so you will see. You can also you will have the presentation, and you can take from here and the references, and you can look for much more info because I did it, of course, only main points that I touch, but of course there are many more to tell about those issues.
Just a personal anecdote here. I grew up in the 60s in the United States into a fairly traditional Jewish family, and of course, the United States in the 60s was very racist. Of course, we're still racist, but it was before the Civil Rights Movement or at the very beginning. Jews would talk about the maid who was coming in to clean the house. They would say that the Shrafa is coming today to clean the house, right?
Schwarze?
Shrafa, which is Yiddish for the black person. It's like the N-word. It's like the Yiddish for the N-word, almost.
Yeah.
I always remember my father at one point. I came home one day and repeated this word. I said, "It's a Shrafa coming in today." I was like 11 years old or something. He said the next time I used that word, he would beat the shit out of me, right? So this was good. But then when I was about 18, I went to Israel for the first time. And I'm sitting in a Tel Aviv apartment. And the woman, obviously Ashkenazim, they said, "Oh yes, the Yemenites coming in today to clean the house." So, I mean, this is when I first realized that there's something not so good about this whole Zionist business, because it immediately made me think about the racism in the United States. The Yemenite is coming in. That's all, that was the word. You probably remember this too. Maybe. Yeah.
Thank you. Other comments, questions?
Thank you, Eitan, again for sharing your deep wisdom in a very short time to give us some idea. I wonder if you could, I wrote it somewhere in the chat, enlighten us a bit on if there were and what were the efforts of political allyship before and after the Nakba between what you call Arab Jews and Palestinians. And also, yeah, maybe like in the beginning of the, or like their organization internally or some sort of, yeah, political efforts. Thanks.
Yes. Look, in fact, yes, the book I mentioned at the end, Marcelo Swirsky and René Ben-Arie, this book is really amazing on that. What they do, in fact, is they bring a very detailed account, historical account, on the shared life, mainly between Mizrahi Jews and Palestinians, all around the country, in many places, in Palestine, and they, yeah, there are many things. I remember, for example, one rather interesting and famous, I don't remember exactly the time, but when one of the leaders of the Mizrahi Jews in the early times, still in the Ottoman times, wrote a letter to the Ottoman rulers against the Aliyah of the Ashkenazi, the Zionists, you know, that when they understood that they are coming to cause troubles here and to destroy the life that we are having here. So I don't have, I mean, it's very big issue, and but I really recommend to read this book. It's really bringing a lot of information, and they put very nice all this information on all this historical account within the frame of colonial thinking. I mean, theory in terms of colonialism. One thing that is important to note here, also from their work, and but as you can see it from today's presentation, also that it's very interesting, unique situation of colonialism when the colonizers were in fact from the same religion at that time, but from their perspective also from the same nation, as part of the ones of being colonized. I'm talking about, again, the Mizrahi Jews, and the Mizrahi Jews became later part of the, you know, the Zionist or the Israeli society, let's say. And they, in fact, endorsed later Zionism, even though their parents, great-grandparents were not Zionists, but they endorsed Zionism, and this was a very important and deep shift. But it's very unique situation when the settlers are settling a place, and in the country they settled and they colonized, there are also some people from, in a way, their own, in a way. So, yeah. Yes, other questions, please.
Yeah, if I can ask a question.
Please.
I'm curious as to, like, as you noted, this was a European white movement, and, you know, from reading Robinson's book, Israel Settler Colonial State, which was really helpful. And he was also speaking about, you know, how that history of like racism, colonialism in Europe helped to push Zionism. But how does that transcend to like Mizrahi Jews or Ethiopian Jews and their support for Zionism? I don't know if you can speak on that. And even like the concept of the Israeli who disguised, or sorry, the Zionist who disguised himself as a Yemenite. Why was that so important?
Why was it important?
Yeah, like why did they have to disguise themselves? And like, I'm just curious if you can speak more on like, I guess, the misleading of Mizrahi Jews.
Yes, the idea was, of course, when they disguised and they try to behave like Mizrahi Jews, and also some disguised as Arabs. You know, this was also one trend of very orientalistic trend to disguise as Arab, to appropriate many of Arab or Palestinian habits. Yeah, it's very important phenomena, I think, in Israel until today. But yeah, I don't know if you mentioned something in your comment, and you talked about in a way, the cooptation of the Mizrahi into the Zionist, into Zionism in Israeli. And in fact, yes, this is one of, in my perspective, one of the tragedies of the situation is that people that came from those countries where they lived together with Muslims in many places in peace and in good relations, and even in Palestine, they became Zionists, many of them very racist. Now, until today, when you look at the votes, the vote in Israel, how the distribution of voting in Israel in terms of ethnicity, class, it's very clear until today. Most of the political right-wing voters are Mizrahi, or originally Mizrahi, and most of the what's called left Zionist is Ashkenazi. So they endorsed very strong and adopted very strong the Zionist ideas and became fully, and they reject even these histories many times. The ones that are most hostile to these narratives that, like the one I bring here, are many times are Mizrahi Jews. Yes.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's really mind-boggling. So they're not only like buying into Zionism, but even more extreme than like Ashkenazis at some degree.
Many times. I can tell you one very, very interesting say expression for that is, or sign for that is a very important research done by Van Leer Institute. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago. They conducted a very thorough research on the attitude of Israel for Arabic language, So how many, to which level Israelis want or study Arabic, or want to study or think it's important and so on. And their findings is amazing. They found out that the Ashkenazi today, there are more Ashkenazi, even if it's small minority, but more Ashkenazi, young Ashkenazi Jews in Israel are more sympathetic, let's say, to the Arabic language than Mizrahi Jews. Mizrahi Jews that their parents or grandparents, their parents many times at least understood Arabic, but the grandparents, they all spoke Arabic. And now the kids of this generation, they really hate Arabic. They reject it. They don't want to know about it. So yes, it has this very sad situation of the attitude toward Arabic culture.
Yes, but it might change. Excuse me for taking the word myself. I had done a lot of research on the Mizrahi Jews, and as far as I know, they were kicked out of their countries. They practically had no choice of really staying there or going, because they were always melded with Zionists, even if they did not have anything in common with Zionists at that time. So they were even guided by the Jewish agency people who went there and who told them how to get to Israel. And then they got there. And then they were there. They had no ticket back, because they were in Iraq or in Libya or whatever. You could not re-enter the country once you left it. You left it for good. So, and then they were in this like discriminatory surroundings. They just had to struggle to find a place in this country, in the system. And as far as I know, there are 2 new studies, and I don't know how to produce them. I would show them to you. It's by Jonathan Mendel. I don't know if you know these books.
Of course. Yoni Mendel is one of the researchers of this important research that I just talked about, the Arabic language. Yes.
This Van Leer study, isn't he? I know that there was a conference, and it is to be found in YouTube. It's on the, it is called Anabin al-Yahud, this conference, and there's a lot of talks there, and it's all on the Israeli Arabic and on the topic of the Arabic other in the Israeli self. So this is just the mix of Arabic and Hebrew, and it's really weird, but I think that it's churning a bit nowadays, because we have got the internet now, and we have got social media, and this makes everybody, enables everybody to communicate with the persons he likes. So it's an individual choice. If you talk Arabic, you can talk it on the phone, or you can listen to Mizrahi music, and it's like a more democratic way. Even if it is still the discriminatory surrounding, you can have this atmosphere, but only online.
Okay, please, Kerstin?
Yeah.
Can you, if you want to ask something, or if not, maybe we can let others also comment or ask, please.
Okay. Now, I just wanted to fill you in on this part of the research that I did, because I think that nowadays Mizrahis do not really anymore reject their Arab hereditary fully. I think that they are on the way of accepting it.
Okay. It's interesting.
It's just like after Arab Spring, you see?
Yeah,
it's
okay.
Like after 2011.
I understand your comment. I don't agree with it, but look, I'm not professional. I quote this very important research by Jonathan Mendel. I saw, I think Mo asked, I think the name is Jonathan Mendel.
Yeah.
And yes, I think it's very important research, and Yuda Shenhav and others, that they did this research, and I think it's still valid until today, very, very much. So
yes, it is.
Thank you.
Very informative. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. I just want to follow up, Eitan, on your point with regards to the rejection of Arabic even, which I thought was really interesting. And I'm thinking that it's also, like Sarah Schulman has spoken about this, the insecurity that, or I don't know, I'm thinking perhaps it's that kind of insecurity that internalize so much of, Arabs as lesser than, and then they're trying to overcome that by being extra Zionist. I don't know if that makes sense, but thanks.
So, yeah, I didn't understand the point, that Mizrahi are super Zionists. This is what you said? I didn't say.
Like, it's like they've internalized so much of the anti-Arab perception that they're trying to compensate for that by being extra Zionist. If that makes sense?
Yes. No, I think probably maybe the most common explanation, which is very common to many people that immigrate in new societies, that they feel that if they would be, they will endorse the most, I would say, important values and habits or whatever of the local, of the leading society, they will be accepted as equals. And yes, I think in a way, many Mizrahi, this is what their strategy was of being integrated in Israel, thinking that if they would be the most Zionist and they could be equals to others. Unfortunately, like in so many other places, it's never really works. But yes, so they endorse, I think, very strongly and extremely sometimes Zionist and racist values, views, practices.
Okay, thank you so much.
Of course. Yes.
Yeah, actually, if I may provide a perspective here from the U.S. regarding younger generations of Mizrahi Jews. I tend to agree with the perspective that Kirsten offered. I think that's the name that I read on the screen.
Yes.
I also sense this here in the U.S. that in many situations there are more sympathetic attitudes from American Jews and Jewish organizations like Jewish Voice for Peace, more sympathetic to the Palestinians than Mizrahi Jewish organizations here in the U.S., like Jemina, for example, Jews indigenous to the Middle East and North Africa, one of the largest Mizrahi Jewish organizations here in the U.S., and also the Harif organization. I sense this firsthand as well. The younger generations seem to be a little bit more resentful to their ancestral history, and understandably so. I understand that very well as a person of Palestinian ancestry. Less so actually from their grandparents, who still feel nostalgic to the old country that they were unrightfully expelled from. So this seems to be a more global trend than just in Israel. So just an interesting thing to notice and think about.
Thank you, Nidal, very much. I'm really moved to hear you, to see your photo at least. Just to mention that Nidal is originally from Salame, that I talked a little bit about it before. Yes, I just want to comment on something that you said. I think it's interesting. I don't know of a study that compares attitudes of young Mizrahi Jews in Israel comparing to them outside of Israel, or maybe even sons and daughters, Mizrahi ones, who for people who left Israel maybe and born in other place. I think it's only my estimation, again, not based on study, but I would assume that Mizrahi Jews in the US, for example, young ones, they don't have to so much adopt the Israeli positions, for example. They are more free from Zionism there. In fact, from outside Israel, it's much easier to see the discrimination and the oppression against Palestinians. We see when Israelis are leaving the country, I think they have more opportunities to see this clearly. So when you are a young Israeli in Israel, and if you are Mizrahi, usually from different reasons, some of them we mentioned here, they tend to be more right-wing and more Zionist, but outside, I think they are free from this sometimes, and they can free themselves to adopt more open positions toward Palestinians, for example. Yeah, other comments, please.
Eitan, actually, Rada also wrote while something really interesting that's more the historical, and I also wrote
please
parallel.
You can help me to read and I can comment maybe.
Okay, so these are two very unrelated things, but they're both important. So I think Rada is asking about Mistaravim, like about the uniqueness of Zionists disguising as Arabs, which is interesting. Maybe you could give us like one word on Alexander Zaid or something like that, I guess. And my question is if you can say something about Zionist, like Jewish Ashkenazi as a political majority versus other Jewish minorities, not just what you call Arab Jews, but also Jews that came from Soviet Union in the 90s. This is less historic, but like to speak a bit about other oppressed groups within the Jewish community. I think that would be important also to give, sorry, it's again a lot.
Yes.
So do what you want with it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, in fact, the issue of disguising as Arabs I think has a long tradition in Zionism and in Israel. It's always involved, of course, very strong Orientalist practices, and also, of course, a lot of violence. It's always, there is some violence within it in this, that we disguise in order to hide our identity, or in order to I don't know, to attack if we need, as mistarvim, those people that disguise today in the units in the army, that maybe became quite known with the series of Fauda. But I think even before the state, those people that disguise as Arabs is to be part of them, but in fact, in many cases, become close to them in order to deal with them, for example, over the land. So to take these habits in order to be able to buy land and to do other deals that will facilitate the existence of Zionist settlers in Palestine. Now, the issue of other minorities in Israel, it goes a little bit beyond the scope of course, the map, just because of, I don't know of localities that were destroyed. For example, I don't know.
Right, that's why it's, yeah.
Very predominant Russian neighborhood in Ashdod that was destroyed. For example, I don't know of stories like this. Or Ethiopian groups, of course, there's discrimination. There's a lot of discrimination, but not in the sense of destroyed localities. So that's why I didn't look into it. But of course, there are many similarities in the strategies of integration. This, of course, or discriminatory practices toward them, of course.
Yeah. Eitan,
Yes, please.
two quick things. Two quick things. One is, you mentioned Fauda, and I have seen some ads for it, and I sort of wanted to avoid it because it looked like it's kind of violence porn, and I wasn't sure about it. But I know that it's very, very popular, and it's getting a lot of viewing. Did you or anyone else have an opinion about it? That's the first thing. The other is that I wanted to make a recommendation. I have a sense that this guy Lindqvist is not very well known outside of Sweden. Is anyone here familiar with his writing? I've just been introduced to it, and it's blowing my mind.
Okay.
So this is a Swedish guy. He writes about, basically, he writes about how racism and extermination and displacement and dispossession of the so-called lower people or the lower races goes back at least close to 1,000 years or in European history. And he's an exceptionally powerful and good writer. He does not mention Palestine or Zionism, but you see it immediately, and it puts what we're talking about in a perspective, a larger perspective of colonialism. And I think it's very relevant for today. So I recommend to get a hold of a used copy of this book. It's amazing.
Thank you.
So Fauda, yeah.
Yeah, Fauda. Okay. Look, Fauda is, of course. First of all, I watch it as a movie. You know, it's an action movie. I watch it. Okay, if I like this, it's very much of action. Very a lot of things going on there. It's fun. I mean, it's fun to watch what I saw. Now, of course, look, it's an Israeli series, of course. Let's not forget, it's an Israeli series. I think there was a little bit of an attempt there to do it a little bit more, how to say it, not too much one-sided, or not okay, to show that also Palestinians are clever and they can also win some battles. And okay, so I think they made it a bit like more, yeah, more clever maybe in a way. They tried at least, but I don't think it's much beyond the fun, you know, as I see it.
Okay.
Yeah.
You haven't found it to be a terribly offensive politically or in terms of propaganda. Fine, good. I'll give it a try.
Of course, it can be seen like this, of course, also.
Yeah. Okay.
Just for information, I just sent a link on that a friend of mine from Gaza wrote on Fauda and Messiah, which is a new series. So
yeah.
You're welcome to read it.
Yeah, I watched this one as well. Quite funny. I found it quite funny.
Excuse me, let me return from Fauda to Tel Aviv back. I remember that there was in the south of Tel Aviv by the seaside, there was this huge quarter where there was like only auto repair companies and small garage like iron sellers and everything, and they just I think it's in the area where the dolphinarium is.
Yeah.
I guess that is a Mizrahi neighborhood too.
Yeah, it's Manshia. It's called Manshia. It's one of the localities in the map. It's one of those localities, Mizrahi localities, that were expelled, and it's in our map. Yes, I didn't talk about it.
Okay.
But
it would be important. Do you know what was if they were compensated or
yes.
were they?
Yes, I know some about it. So they were. First of all, I have to say that also for me it was quite new to know that they were evicted by force there. In fact, they were forced out. They got some compensation, but very, very little ones. They were tricked many times to go out from there. They were demonstrating. I found many many articles in the media from the 50s, the 60s of attempts to evict them, and they resist and oppose it. So yes, it has a long history of eviction and resistance to that, and some of them got some compensation. Yes.
Yeah, because to my knowledge, this is the southern part of Tel Aviv used to be traditionally one of the parts where there were a few Palestinian inhabitants. I remember that there was a person that was married to a Palestinian and they were living there. So it was like a mixed quarter somehow.
Yes. Manshia was a big neighborhood of Jaffa of 13,000 people lived there. 1,000 of them were Jewish until 1948. So it was a mix. There was Jewish schools there, synagogues. It was to some extent mixed neighborhoods. Until the Nakba, of course. After the Nakba, the Palestinians they were expelled from there. I just want to mention that, Nidal, if you still hear us, you put before the nice photo of the house in Salame. If you can put it again, then people can see it, the house of the village of your grandparents.
Yeah.
Your father was born there, no? Your father was born in Salame?
Correct. My father and grandfather. Well, we think it's most likely that house, just to be accurate, but it has not yet been confirmed. I'm trying to save bandwidth, but let me put the background again for the benefit of everybody. Just give me a second here.
Okay. Meanwhile, if people want to ask something more,
and actually, I have toured Sarame I backpacked when I visited Israel, and I toured the entire village on foot. It was an amazing experience.
Yeah.
So technology today makes me feel like I'm sitting in Salome while I'm here in California in the USA.
Just in front of the mosque. This house, 2 floors house, is just 100 meters in front of the mosque of Salome that is still standing until today. Yeah.
Eitan?
Yes, please.
Hi, it's Joel.
Hi, Yoel.
Hi. May I comment something of my own knowledge a little bit?
Of course.
First, I wanted to say the very core of mechanism, also in continuation to other questions asked here, was the Zionism abused the Jewish identity of the Mizrahi, and what they have done, they turn it upside down. You are not Arab who belong to the Jewish religion or something like that, but you are Jewish, and they made the Arab identity external, uncondemned. This is the mechanism. This because almost all of the Mizrahi were traditional. They were connected with the religion, and you know. And the second thing, it is not only Arab Jews. What is called Mizrahi is all the non-European Jews. It's the Kurds, it's the Persians, it's the everyone with the. So they have the same fate, if you want to call it. I want also to comment that many of the criticism. So I just want to say that it creates just like I think Gada said, it creates indeed internalization of the Zionist narrative and self-denial, which is terrible.
Yoel,
Yes.
Can I interrupt you 1 second before you move on?
Yeah.
You are strengthening exactly my point, what I
Yeah.
before. It's exactly the point of anti-Arabization.
Yes.
By Zionists and they became self-hated Arabs in a way.
Yes.
So and you can of course tell it from your own experience.
Just the last point is that usually the let's say the criticism or the arguments against the Israeli regime of the Mizrahi, usually it doesn't include the Palestinian issue. They do not connect, as if they want or better conditions or a better class, but very, very few, if at all, connected to the colonization of the Palestinians and connect between the two phenomena. They do not do that usually. Those who do that, all of them are secular and they are very few.
Exactly. I have to say that I completely agree with you. It's a very good comment. Just to strengthen the second point, that to tell to maybe those who don't know, I mentioned, and we mentioned before, some of the names, like, of course, Yehuda Shenhav, and
Yes.
the very important project of what's called the Democratic Rainbow. So it's a very important project, and there are many, mostly Mizrahi intellectuals, scholars, activists in the last, I would say, 20, 30 years that change deeply the discourse, the Mizrahi discourse in Israel. This is really very important, and they do this connection, of course, with colonialism, with Zionism. They do very, very good job on that. But maybe the sad part of it is that views like yourself, Yoel, and those people that we mentioned are by the Mizrahi themselves, they are so strongly rejected.
Yes, yes.
By
Exactly.
so many Mizrahi, they are so rejected. And this is so really tragic that, yeah, it's really self-hatred.
That's the reason it is highly difficult to fully criticize the Zionist ideology here for any Mizrahi. It will be attacked by the vast majority of the others who had been colonized already.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. It's really important.
Okay.
I wonder, by the way, just a short comment on that, if that's not one of the reasons why it's really important to speak about these things also outside of the space between the river and the sea, in order to create allyship that approach it from different angles, and to make connections that somehow we're not able to make a lot of times when we born, grow up, and stay in these mechanisms. So thank you for sharing that.
But how you do it? So how you do from Berlin? How you exercise what you just said? You know, it's interesting if you can elaborate a little bit on that.
Sure. I mean, I hope it's interesting for everyone. And just very shortly, I mean, I think only after leaving Israel as a Jewish Israeli, I learned how to reflect on power relations and what this even means. And then, and being able to look at other examples of power relations that are not connected to my story, that don't immediately threaten my identity as a whole, and suddenly saying, wait, oh, this looks familiar, and being able to even approach it in a way that is deconstructing a narrative, narrative hegemonic. And then, you know, I think one of the big questions is then how to bring this back, and how to translate it, and how to create also something that is not, again, from you know, like now becoming a white European, even more less than like the legitimacy in the own community of a Jewish Ashkenazi speaking to the Jewish Ashkenazi in Israel. It's not even legitimate because you leave. So then, even then, like coming back, and what is my speaking position, but still trying to create, some sort of accessible, breaking it down, and I think it helps to collect examples of cooperations and of joint struggles that are outside of our context, as inspiration, or as,
Did you have maybe attempts or experience with specifically Mizrahi Israelis or Jews or Israelis that this shift of place maybe helped to change something? Do you have any experience on that? Because we're talking mostly about Mizrahi here, so.
Right. I can definitely only speak from my own experience. That is not a Mizrahi experience, and I think even to make this difference of Mizrahi and Ashkenazi is something that in our Ashkenazi community we didn't speak about. Like maybe you make a difference of religious or non-religious, and like outside, I mean, in Berlin, I actually don't have. I mean, also there, the scene of the left Israeli is an Ashkenazi one. Like very, very widely, it's not completely true. There are people who are writing wonderful literature on this. I'm definitely not them, but I'm happy to send a link.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? If not, we will close. I don't know if there were things in the chat that
I had just a question. I'm just curious why you decided to do a presentation on Mizrahi Jews.
Okay, my whole point was that the destruction of those localities is part of the destruction of the Mizrahi Jewish localities is part of the Israeli colonization, of Zionist colonization. And this was all my point today, to try to show that it goes back to the beginning of Zionism, all those racist, anti-Arab attitudes toward the Arab Jews. It's rooted very deeply in Zionism, and the the destruction of their localities before Israel and most of them after Israel is part of this colonization. Or it comes from the same roots. As I explained, of course, it's very, very different. The destruction of those Mizrahi localities is very different in many levels. I mentioned it already, between them and the Palestinian one and the Syrian one, because they are really the enemies of the Zionist project. But still, the Mizrahi ones are not part of the core of Zionist movement, and they paid some price for it. And even though, as we talked now, also your comments, they try to be very much part of the Israelis, you know. So I don't know if maybe it was not very convincing, but in my view, yes, the destruction of those places, it's part of the colonization, the Israeli colonization, yes. And if we don't understand this, I think we missed very core issue of Zionism as an anti-Arab movement.
No, thanks. I was totally convinced. I'm just hoped you can speak more on it. I also really like your reframing of Zionism as an anti-Arab movement, because it's not only for the decolonization of Mizrahi Jews, but also to ensure more solidarity between Arab nations. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, actually, if I may comment on Ghada's comment, I think Eitan's choice to talk about Mizrahi Jews is an excellent topic. I think this is one of the missing pieces in the whole story of the Arab-Israeli conflict. The Mizrahi Jewish community, as we say in America here, they got the short end of the stick from both sides. And it's a story that was not told about their suffering and the numbers that they were expelled from their ancestral homeland. It's almost similar to the number of Palestinians who were expelled around the Nakba. And I think moving forward in the future, they will probably play a very important role in bringing the Arabs and Israelis together, the Palestinians specifically and Israelis together. So it's a very important story, and it's really not much heard. We see a lot of them here in America. They have organizations, and I personally learned a lot from talking to them personally, different generations of them, including many Mizrahi Jews who were kicked out of Baghdad and Egypt, Cairo, Libya, all over the countries. It's an amazing piece of the story that that's very informative and very informational and educational about the root of this struggle and which parties suffered more than other parties from their own perception. I actually would like to even see more research done on this issue, the Mizrahi Jews all over the world.
I do my very best. And I want to add something. I don't know if you have heard of this, is Yossi Sukari. He has wrote a book on Libyan Jews who went into concentration camps themselves. That was totally new to me. It was a book like in 2015 or something, or 14. They had Libyan Jews in concentration camps and sent them because it was a colony of Italy. And then they went to Italy, and then they were encamped in Bergen-Belsen in Germany.
Yeah.
So, this a bit changed the discourse of the Mizrahi Jews all over. So you see, it's all a mix.
Yeah.
It's very
I just want
complicated.
to thank you, Kerstin. I want just to comment. For me, it's very important to your important comment, Nidal also. In fact, one thing that I think we should be a little bit careful is to compare or to put more or less on the same level, in a way, the expulsion, and there were expulsions, of course, of Arab Jews or Jews from Arab countries, of course, also in North Africa. Okay, this happened, of course, and these people deserve the, I don't know, compensation, right of return, or whatever. For me, there is right of return for anyone who was kicked out from his home everywhere in the world. So, of course, Jews, not only Palestinians, obviously. But to put this more or less in the same level of the expulsion of the Palestinians, it's very, very problematic. In fact, if you read Yehuda Shenhav on that, it's very, very important analysis. So I'm not going to get into it. It was a huge discussion in Israel on this, and in Hebrew, and I'm sure in English you can find a lot of materials. I just want, again, to stress that my point here was expulsions of Mizrahi Jews by Israel and not by Arab countries. This is another issue. It's important, but it's in another project. I just want to make this comment, to be careful of this comparison, which is, in many aspects of it, is very problematic. I would like to conclude here.
May I ask a question?
Okay.
Sure, quick. Yes, I was just wondering, do you have any information on Mizrahi Jews that were expelled from the various Arab countries after the founding of the State of Israel, who did not go to Israel, but who went, for example, to Europe or to other places? A good friend of mine from Munich, in fact, his family immigrated to France, and he became very anti-Zionist because he said the Zionists were responsible for his family having been kicked out of Morocco. But you haven't mentioned this group, so I was wondering if you had any.
No, because it's not at all in the scope of my talk today. Of course, there's a lot of information about it. You can go to the Israeli government website, and you will see forms for Arab Jews to fill in order to ask for compensation. Okay, there are a lot of information. I'm sure also in English you can find. But again, I didn't do today. If you want one recommendation, I don't know if you understand French. I don't know. It's with English subtitles. I think there is one. You mentioned Moroccans. There is one really great documentary series for TV done by Ron Kachlili. It's called Tzarfokaim. Tzarfokaim, it's the combination of two words. Tzarfatim is French, and Kaim, Marokkaim, the Moroccans. So Moroccan French, something like that, a mixture of that. And it's very, very interesting, very, very interesting documentary series on the Moroccans that came to Israel from France, and their identity issues, Zionism, into this thing. It's really very interesting, and I think you can find it online with English subtitles. I recommend very much. And so I would like really to close it here. I will still send you, of course, the link to the video of this presentation, the presentation itself. You are welcome to ask me questions. If I can add more information, I would be happy, of course, to do so. I have to say that I really enjoyed doing these 4 lessons. I myself learned a lot from your comments, and from further deepening the research. There is always new thing to learn, and I'm really glad and thank you all for participating in it. So thank you very much, and I hope we'll see again in other occasions. And
can we get a list of participants? Can we get a list of participants, or is that that not on?
This is, I would send the list of participants only if everyone accepts. So I'm sorry, I cannot.
It's understandable. So people, let him know.
If people want.
Eitan, please don't forget to send the link to the book and a link maybe how one can donate to you and your project. That would be good as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Yudi. Thank you.
And the link to the map.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
That was good.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Eitan. Thanks.
Thank you
ביי.
very much.
Bye.
שלום, תודה.
בבקשה. ביי ביי.
Okay, Milo.